Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
We all had such a hard first year outside of college because we didn't know what to do with ourselves. For 4 years, we were being given a schedule, and not just academically with classes. Socially, we were told, okay, on this day, you're going to go to this frat at this time, or you're going to go to this bar at this time. And then it's like you graduate and it's all on you. Besides your work schedule, it's you have to figure out what you want to do outside of work. You have to figure out, okay, do I want to spend this time working out? What do I want to make myself for dinner? Where do I go to meet people? Do I want to hang out with my friends tonight? Do I not? And it's because we didn't explore ourselves and our own interests enough in college that we didn't have like the confidence to make those decisions coming out of it. It was like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Do I actually enjoy doing this?
Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays, the podcast about how young adults are navigating sex, relationships, and life today.
We are your hosts, Dr. Chez, Leeby, and Stephanie Boye, and each week we will share our candid conversations with young adults and experts about today's tough topics.
So today we are talking to Lauren. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So this episode will begin a 4 or 5 series module exploring college, frat and sorority life, parties, etc. Because when we as parents bring our children to college, and I have one more to still bring to college, we are literally overwhelmed with anxiety because there's so much that is unknown. And I know students are also anxious. So we want to help our listeners have some insider info or advice. Maybe you can give us some insight as to what you wish you knew before you went off to college and what would have helped you to navigate your freshman or sophomore year a little bit better or healthier. So let's start there.
I wish that I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do. Like I didn't have to go along with the expectations if I didn't want to. I wish I had explored my own interests a little more rather than just focus on the party scene of it all.
I'm just going to jump in and say, how do you think you could have done that better? If you have a young cousin or sister entering college, how do you think you could have explored yourself more than the college expectation, if you will, like the drinking party culture? I know that that's very strong in our cultural sort of understanding of what college is, but how do you think, or what would you recommend to help people go in, explore your own interests?
There were so many clubs and activities that went along with my major that I just never looked into because my time was so taken up by Greek life. And there were good things about that. Like I did a lot of philanthropy that I'm really proud of, but I wish I had done things for my major more that could have helped me get internships more easily, like doing like student run groups. But I never bothered looking into stuff like that because I was so absorbed in Greek life.
Lauren, this is going to be so helpful. I'm so excited about this. I would love to backtrack a little bit and explore with you, or you help us explore, what are the expectations? So like you're laying out this first one, which is the expectation, and it's kind of a myth, is what you're saying, that you go to college and the majority of your time is Greek life, party life, like that's the expectation. And is the expectation every weekend, every day, like that's the priority? Like what is the kind of stated in your head, the mantra of what is expected in terms of this? You're talking social expectations. So what are the social expectations? What are maybe the sexual, intimate, relational expectations? What are the academic expectations? What are the personal expectations, parental? Like, this is a great, great topic to understand going in. What do you come in with that was, I'm sure, unexpressed and unexplored?
I think that I can divide parental and academic expectations and then social and hookup expectations and tie those in together. I know parental expectations, a lot of it had to do with academic success, whereas socially, it didn't matter how you were doing in school. And I remember going into college not being worried about the academics at all. And there was such an emphasis on the social part of it. And I think it totally depends on where you go to school. I think places like a big state school, there's a big emphasis on the social aspect of it and going out like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe not Saturday, but maybe another random day during a week. And hookup culture is very, very prominent. It's not something that's like necessarily forced upon you, but it is expected. And I think what we see in media depicting a quintessential college experience has a lot to do with that.
So when you go in and I feel like I have to be honest, I feel like I kind of went into college the same way, not at all concerned about academics. I hope my children aren't listening to this, but I literally don't think that I had a lot of like worry that that was what I had to do. But I think that those underlying messages about what socially is expected of you, what in hookup is expected of you, that has also changed so drastically. And I think there are a lot of parents who maybe, and even young people who poo poo the idea that there is this hookup culture. Do you feel as though hookup culture is a real thing? And if your answer is yes to that, what are the expectations of hookup culture? How do you navigate that? And maybe what are the myths around hookup culture that you wish you were able to understand before going to college?
I think the hookup culture is absolutely true. It's a thing. And I think that what's expected of you is to partake in it. Like, I think, like, you should be having sex, you should be going home with people. But it's also like a double standard in terms of women. Like, you can't be sleeping with too many people, but you also don't want to be prudent in not sleeping with anyone. Like, there's all these weird nuances that you don't know until you're there and you're in it. I don't know if there's any myths surrounding it.
People think that hookup culture is kind of a myth, like, oh, this is like it's been around for forever. Is it that different? And I guess like what you're saying already is I don't feel like when I grew up, there was an expectation of you to hook up at all. Like, I think you thought maybe you'll find your boyfriend, you might even find the person you're going to end up with, you might have your first relationship, but I don't feel like there was ever an expectation to lose your virginity, to that you know what I mean? Like, yes, of course there was someone could be acting slutty, like that was always slut shaming was always a thing, or a prude, but I don't think prude was really looked down upon in some ways as it may be looked down upon today, that you're really like opting out of hookup culture. And I know actually statistically 30% of the college population does opt out of hookup culture. So yes, there are studies around it, but I would like you to tell us, like, what does that expectation of hookup culture look like? Because I don't, Dr. Says, do you feel like there was an expectation for you to hook up in college or sleep with people? Or like, did you feel like you couldn't be a virgin going into college? I think that's very different.
I did feel that. I did feel that there was this unwritten, I guess it is an expectation that if you are dating somebody, it wasn't just the casual sex that was happening, but if you were dating someone, you were not going to be a virgin. Like you were sleeping with them. Basically, that was an expectation. And there was kind of the frat boy thing of like, you knew it was going to be talked about. We talked about that before, Lauren. You knew it was going to be talked about around the frat. So these rules that you're saying, these unwritten rules, and I wanted to say my daughter had that rule about Greek life, like you do not date somebody that somebody's currently dating, has dated, will date. Like it is like, how do you navigate that? How do I figure out who my potential sorority sisters that are older are going to date? So there's these weird rules. And then also the hard discrepancy of, are you going to be labeled a prude? Are you going to be labeled a slut? What's the in between, and what does that look like? So for me, I think that was there. I didn't want to be a prude, but I didn't want to be a slut. So I think that was there for me. I'm trying to kind of remember, but I was very focused on academics. I wanted to go to graduate school, and I had a little different situation. So I was super focused on academics, and that was my value, was getting my grades, whatever. So I think that's different now. I think there is this big social media or media push to college is the time to get blackout drunk and hook up and da 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 da. And that's, and the best 4 years of your life. So anyway, I'm happy that you're able to keep going and myth bust with this. So keep going, Lauren. What's your take on what we're saying?
I think that there is such an emphasis now that it's like the best 4 years and it's just an excuse to go party rather than the emphasis being on this is a time where you can figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life. This is a time to do well in your major studies. Like, yeah, it's a weird emphasis on this is like a 4-year break from real life. And I think that causes a lot of these weird social nuances because it creates this attitude of like, oh, well, nothing really matters. This isn't real life. It's not high school where I'm with all the people I grew up with, but I'm also not an adult yet where I have a job. And there's all these responsibilities and expectations. Kind of like backtracking on what you said about like there was an expectation of if you were dating someone and you were sleeping with them, and kind of step what you were saying about like you went into college and you're like, oh, I might find a boyfriend and whatnot. I feel like that has left. Like that's not a thing anymore, because especially with big schools, there's a big like paradox of choice because there's so many people around. And I think you can even see it now, like younger people aren't really dating as much. Like they would date in high school, you get into relationships, and then I feel like in college it's a big free for all, and then you get into adult life, and that's when you actually start really dating. No one knows how to actually date because we're so programmed to hookup culture in college, where it's like you go to a party, you don't really have to do much because you're all the same age and doing the same stuff, and it's easy to connect. You can go home with someone, or you can be like, oh, I'll see them tomorrow night at the party, and then you see them and then go home with them then, or the next day or the next night.
Well, I want to just say, like, I think that's really actually a very interesting thing. I think that what Dr. Chez was saying was somewhat similar to what I was saying. I wasn't saying people didn't have sex. I was saying when you were in
Yeah.
a relationship, you were expected to have sex. And I think that, Lauren, you picked up on that. That's what I was saying, that it's different now than the disconnected sex as an expectation versus the relationship sex as an expectation, which I think the relationship sex as an expectation in college has been around at least since I was in college. But I think it's that hookup expectation of sex that is way different. And I think what is interesting, because you're outside of the age of college, you graduated several years ago. And I think what I have seen, and I think is so important in studies that I've read, is that those early relationships, and honestly, I believe you're around 26 years of age. I think that what you experience in college has sort of migrated into high school, and that hookup culture is very prevalent in high school, at least from what I hear from my daughter who's still in high school. So I think what's interesting is I had the opportunity in high school and in college to explore relationships, what worked, what didn't work, understanding, like building intimacy, building trust, all of those kind of things, because the expectation wasn't sex right away. It was sex after the intimacy was built, right? You're losing that critical step of how to be in relationship and show caring and show trust and show all of these things. And I'm just going to give a small example. The reason I was late earlier to this recording is my daughter said to me, hey, I was really hurt by something my boyfriend said last night. And he had talked about a girl, a famous person. And he was like, well, she would never like me because blah, blah, blah. But I think she's super hot. And I'm like, she goes, and that like hurt my feelings. And she's like, but I feel like I'm wrong to feel that way. And I was like, well, I think that would hurt my feelings because it just makes you feel like, oh, this is what somebody wants. And I went into the bathroom and she told me, she goes, I'm worse about it. I say things about people all the time and I don't think about it. And now when he reversed it and he did it, it hurt my feelings. And I said, you know what? It's really important to be vulnerable. And you can say to that person, hey, I understand that like I've done that a bunch of times. And now when you did it to me, it hurts. And I just want to tell you that I'm going to try not to do that. And the reason I'm saying that is because these are the explorations of how intimate relationships, and by that I don't mean sex, but intimate, personal, deep relationships that you're forming, early relationships, help you to understand how to navigate bigger things. Like right now it's about movie stars, who cares? But then maybe it's down the road, it's something else. And when all we're doing is hooking up and we ignore, literally suppress our natural instincts to want someone to put us above everything, we literally are denying our true nature. And then I think we end up in relationships that are dysfunctional. And I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Chez because I really think that those early relationships, we've lost that connectedness, that intimacy building, and the ability to be like, I'm okay with being in a relationship. I haven't caught feelings. I have a person that I care about. I'm willing to be vulnerable.
There's this definition of intimacy, meaning it's the vulnerability plus authenticity. And so what I think happens in hookup culture, in these expectations for casual sex, the vulnerability is kind of masked or missing because you don't want them to see you vulnerable in any way. They may see your body, but you don't want them to let them think, as you said, that you're catching feelings or anything vulnerable. And the authenticity is missing because we live in a world where authenticity is not valued in the same way. It's starting to, there's a lot more push for that. But
there's so many filters too, by the way.
There's so many filters and there's so many, so many ways to be inauthentic, especially if you're wanting to impress someone, physically and otherwise. So there, it isn't true intimacy. So then that means, like you're saying, how do you really develop that so that in future relationships, you really are able to hone those skills and feel really confident and competent in that? And you're right, Lauren, that if college is the 4 years where, life gone wild kind of thing, and then you're supposed to, after college, figure out through a dating app, how do you really date and what do you do? And there's no teachings on this stuff ever. That's like a soapbox I have, is how do you do healthy relationships? We know it's not okay, but we don't know what is okay. So anyway, how do you navigate that? And that's an interesting question for you at your age too. I don't know if you're dating someone or not, but after being through these experiences in college, how do guys and girls then come into, okay, now maybe I should have this dating relationship? And what does that look like? And how does that actually work? And I know that you were connected to fraternity friends, and I love that you can kind of give us the insider view too, as we're talking about college preparation. What is that like in the moment of college? And what is that like for you now post-college with these guys? Are they actually in the same place of like, now I want to date somebody? Yep, got that out of my system. Now I want to date. So curious about all that.
I think the biggest thing with learning how to date post-college is getting out of that, because kind of what you guys were saying, there's a lack of intimacy emotionally. There's a lot of physical vulnerability and intimacy, but not a lot of emotional. And you have to all of a sudden jump into being, willing to show that the emotional intimacy, which a lot of people aren't, since some people just don't date. But we're not in college anymore, so you're not meeting people easily. It's not even like you're hooking up with anyone. To answer your last question, I think with a lot of guys, it's half and half. I had some guys that I know be like, yep, got that out of my system, ready to start dating. But then I had another half still be kind of stuck in like frat boy mindset. And I think that depends on where you move. Like if you're moving to a place like New York, DC, Boston, Philly, where there's a lot of people, it's kind of the same thing as being in college or a college frat. There's so many different people that you can meet, so many different options. So it's like, why bother being tied down? But then there's other people who go into that, oh, well, I'm in my 20s now. I want to get married and have kids for a couple years. So I guess I should just start dating. And I think that's concerning in a way because it's like, how do you know what you really want? Are you getting into a relationship and showing that emotional intimacy with someone that's right for you? Or are you just doing it with the first person who checks some boxes?
Yeah, I think that's why, like, for those who opt out, and like, as I said, like, studies show over and over again that 30% of college students do opt out of like hookup culture, and they're looking for ways to connect with other people. The problem is that college culture is so built around the same thing that those big cities are built around. It's like you go to a bar, you go to all of these things. You have to find opportunities and ways to meet people, like you were saying, when you're exploring your true like things that you like, even if it's rock climbing and you live in New York City or Boston or whatever, you have to go to those places to find that, because you're right. Like, if you're continuing the same behavior, you're going out to a bar and you're expecting that, and I'm not saying you can't meet someone at a bar. I'm just saying, like, you actively have to work on yourself. Like, there's so much work that each of us has to do, especially in college. If you've been numbing how you actually feel, if you've been avoiding being authentic and sharing part of yourself, being vulnerable, you don't just pop out of college and you're like, "Woo, ready to be vulnerable." That is not happening. It is just not happening. You're absolutely right that it is a little scary, because you do need to have a little more time to explore yourself, to explore just not even your interest, but also who you are, what you have denied. It's not serving you to deny it and push it down and all that kind of stuff. I will say that I can't believe Dr. Chez would say anything different. I think when we avoid actually being honest with ourselves, it is problematic. And you, at some point, you have to pay the piper. You have to learn about yourself if you want to be in a healthy relationship. So you're absolutely right. I wonder whether there's the loneliness epidemic, which has also been studied a lot lately, is persisting outside of college. We talked a lot about how loneliness happens inside of college. But if you are leaving college and feeling unprepared, and now it's like, now what? I don't, I haven't really connected. I haven't really had these authentic connected relationships. And now I'm in the real world where I meet less people. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, there is definitely a loneliness epidemic outside of college. I know myself included, all my friends, we all had such a hard first year outside of college because we didn't know what to do with ourselves. For 4 years, we were being given a schedule, and not just academically with classes. Socially, we were told, okay, on this day, you're going to go to this frat at this time, or you're going to go to this bar at this time. And then it's like you graduate and it's all on you besides your work schedule. It's you have to figure out what you want to do outside of work. You have to figure out, okay, do I want to spend this time working out? What do I want to make myself for dinner? Where do I go to meet people? Do I want to hang out with my friends tonight? Do I not? And it's because we didn't explore ourselves and our own interests enough in college that we didn't have like the confidence to make those decisions coming out of it. It was like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Do I actually enjoy doing this?
I love that you say that. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking for the like, okay, it's not just the 30% who opt out, but for those who opt out and who do find their authentic interest, whether that's going and exploring, like, I don't know, whatever your city is, like going to museums, being part of a finance club or being part of the tennis team. Like, I think the more engaged you are in college, you can continue those relationships outside of college. And I don't mean necessarily with those exact people, but you would continue going to a tennis club because it became part of your adulting life that you incorporated. Because party is like the continuous party is pretty friggin' hard to maintain once you leave college.
Yeah, absolutely.
It also, what's interesting to me as a family therapist is, you go from this family nest to being independent, but because we're, creatures of connection, you create this family within college. And the Greek life system, and outside of that, just living in a dorm, you kind of develop this little tribe of healthy and unhealthy influences, I'll say that. But you develop this little family, and then that's kind of cut off after the 4 years pretty much because everybody goes different places often. I remember my son graduation day was grieving. I mean, he was like really upset. And it was because his fraternity had become his brothers in the real sense. They were his family, and he didn't know what it was going to be like to be completely independent. So it's kind of interesting because as parents, we think we're sending them off to college, they're on their own, da da da. But it does become this substitute family. And then you figure out, after college, okay, what's my tribe now? Where am I? And I think recognizing that ahead of time, if we're talking about preparation for college, recognizing ahead of time, like, be a little choosy about who your family is. You get to choose this next 4 years, not just they choose you. And with Greek life, it feels like they choose me or they don't. But I'm saying be a little choosy about your influences and your tribe and your people around you, because they will stay connected if you want to, and that's beautiful, and or it's the people that you kind of rely on for the next 4 years. So I love that you're saying all these things, both of you.
Okay, so just because you brought us back to, we want to talk to the kid who's going to college, and I think it's really important that we talk about not necessarily Greek life, but yesterday I had said something to you that I was interested in exploring girls not considering their sexual pleasure in hookups, why pleasure was not thought of by most of them. I mean, I want to say most, not all. And then I said, or we could talk about fraternity culture from a female perspective. And I also said, we could also talk about why I believe girls falsely think that cunnilingus or oral sex performed on them, on a woman, is gross. What we sort of started to explore was how, as far as like hookups go, hookups and fraternity life seem to be very closely related. Would you agree with that, Lauren?
Absolutely.
The interesting thing that we first talked about, I said, why are girls not interested in, like, or not talking about like their own sexual pleasure? And we kind of discussed, and maybe you can give us a little clarity on this, that there is some reward that may not be sexual pleasure, but what is the reward that girls get from the hookup experience?
The reward is what they think is an emotional connection.
The fact that they think that there's potential for a relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Do they get
Does
the
what?
reward?
No, momentarily, but not in the long run. I mean, I don't want to say it never happens, but
There's a lot more hooking up than there is connections being created.
correct. And like every once in a while, there could be a connection formed from a one night stand, but that's usually the exception. I do think that there's this feeling from girls. Girls are always looking for an emotional connection, and unfortunately, hookup culture doesn't allow for that. And going home with a guy, sleeping with him, doing whatever, that is the closest thing you're going to get to that in most instances.
So, can I ask you a question? So, going home with a guy, sleeping with him, what like, is there the expectation, if you're flirting with somebody, is there the expectation that you have to have sex with them?
No, I wouldn't say that, but it's definitely not off the table. And it doesn't have to be like that, not necessarily. Like, there has to be attraction on both sides. I don't think it's to the point where girls are just going home with any guy that gives them attention. I'm sure that does happen sometimes, but there is at least some level of base attraction for a girl to want to go home with a guy. But I've, like, with not exploring who you are and your own interests so much, it's like, okay, what are you actually attracted to? Are you actually attracted to this guy, or are you attracted to the potential of emotional connection?
Well,
Like,
also, we talked about how the other rewards that girls get, there are other, at least two other potential rewards from the hookup. Since I think it's 90% of guys will experience orgasm and sexual satisfaction from a hookup. And it's literally the reverse for girls. It's like 10%
Yeah.
of females will experience sexual pleasure from a hookup. And that's not saying that they're not enjoying it, but it won't be like orgasm type hookup. And that doesn't seem to bother young women. And I often think it's funny because I think, how many times would a guy go back to a hookup if he wasn't having an orgasm? If he was just left a little sexually frustrated, it just wouldn't happen. He would move on. Where girls are far more willing to go back to that same hookup because there's the other aspect of what a female is getting from it. And I think it's important that we call this what it is, because I think it helps us to understand the balance in a relationship. And I think what girls get from it is this: society wants a girl to be hot. The reason that girls are showing their ass in their bikinis on Instagram is because they do like the attention of all the fire, like comments, all of those things. And so a guy choosing you means that you are hot.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that maybe this is a completely different conversation, but I'm thinking a lot about like the physical vulnerability aspect of it all and how girls are a lot more self-conscious of their bodies. Or maybe another reason that girls are so willing to go back to a guy they've already been with is because that's easier than being physically vulnerable with someone else. Because I feel like from such a young age, like guys are taught to be so secure with their body, where girls are taught the exact opposite to kind of hide it. Maybe that's a totally different topic. That just popped into my mind.
I think that's very, very true. And I think what you're saying, Steph, too, is that if you're insecure and yet, somebody is interested again, then it's like validation, like, oh, okay, I'm wanted, I'm desired, And you're right, Lauren, that it's easier with somebody that you've, been vulnerable with before, so to speak, that it's easier, so to speak, rather than a new person and risking that.
Go ahead.
Knowing what you know about Greek life and the way things are kind of rated these days, and people are rated and people are talked about, that's a big risk for girls. Like being that vulnerable to be willing to be spoken about is scary, and that's something that college, we don't talk about. We don't talk about, like, is this rating system okay? No, heck to the no. Am I right about the rating system, Lauren?
I personally did not experience that. Maybe it's a thing at other schools, but I don't think that people are rating people individually. I think there were some aspects of like, oh, like that frat, like that's like a top tier frat, or that's a top tier sorority. Like that's where a lot of hot girls are. And like all those girls are hot. But I wouldn't say it fell onto individual people. I think it was more the fear of just being talked about amongst your peers. And I think that fear of physical vulnerability kind of ties into what you were saying, Stephanie, about like girls not enjoying oral sex. I think it has a lot to do with like just being self-conscious about your body and being like, oh my God, like, is everything okay? Is this going to be talked about amongst all these guys? So rather than it being like a rating system about people, I think it's just gossip.
You had said something, Lauren, yesterday that I thought was so brilliant. And I think it really speaks to this place where females find themselves. And you said girls are just trying to fly under the radar. And I think, in our exploration of that, I mean, you can explain it if you want to, but I think flying under the radar goes back to what I asked you, those 3 specific topics about hookups in fraternities, about why girls don't care or seem to speak about their own pleasure, or will return to relationships or hookups even if they didn't derive pleasure from it, and why they're afraid of letting guys go down on them and experiencing oral sex. So maybe you want to clarify what you meant, but I think that sort of summarized maybe exactly what the question I was asking you. So I'll let you opine on that.
I think because it's one of those things where everyone's so connected. Like you were saying, it's like you're forming your own little family again. So everyone's very involved with each other's business and stuff. You don't want to be talked about in a negative way, and that's just basic human nature. You know, you don't want to, especially because you're stuck with these people all day, every day, for 4 years. You don't want to be talked about in a negative way. You don't, and then, like, if someone says something bad about hooking up with you, then it kind of goes into what you were saying. It's like, then, someone else might not want to hook up, and that lowers your feeling of self-worth and a feeling, quote, hot, end quote. It all ties into insecurity, wanting to fit in, and doing things to please other people rather than yourself. I feel like women are just always taught from a young age to not do things for themselves or their own pleasure, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, etc.
Lauren, you just brought yourself full circle back. And these are the key points. And when something comes full circle, it's always like, like this is the holy grail, I believe. You're talking about insecurity, high school, college, very insecure time. So how do we help build security? You're talking about wanting to fit in. That is like the ultimate goal of college. It's not usually academics. It's not usually self-exploration. It's wanting to fit in. Many reasons behind that, but bam, you are so right on about that. And doing things to compromise yourself because you're wanting to please others or do what they want versus doing what you want. And that was the first thing that you said, like one of the most important things. So I love that you're coming full circle to that, because if we're trying to help parents and college students entering college to understand what are the real tasks at hand here, and those three things, finding security, finding yourself versus wanting to fit in, and not compromising yourself, finding what you want. Bam, holy grail. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'm just going to say one other thing, because I know Dr. Chez will always give the perspective of sorority, fraternity, because that was her experience. That's her kids' experience. I personally have the opposite experience. So I just want to speak to the parents of the kids that aren't in those things. And I just want to say, and this is not to trash fraternities or sororities or anything like that, but hearing this also makes me think that, like, when you are trying to fit into your family and there are these expectations that require you to lessen or to ignore who you are to be part of the group, it's not necessarily functional. It's a little bit dysfunctional. And so for those who opt out of hookup culture, for those who opt out of sorority, fraternity, it does afford you the opportunity you are going to experience loneliness. I can tell you this for both of my kids. You are going to experience loneliness, but you are also going to do a deep exploration of who you are and how you navigate these things, which is a little bit different. You do still have unhealthy influences, but maybe it's less of a need to fit in because you're by definition not fitting in, if that makes sense.
100%. And I'm with you on the sorority fraternity thing. I don't think that those three things that you said, Lauren, I don't see that Greek life helps people be secure. I think it fosters insecurity even more, especially during rushing. I also feel like it doesn't help you with your self-exploration because, as you said, your social calendar is pretty full with their expectations, which sure, philanthropy, those kind of things are beautiful. Community, that's beautiful. But it also doesn't give you much room for your own self-exploration. So the task at hand for an individual is to find ways to feel secure, find ways to self-explore, find ways to not compromise, but to go deep within with what do you really want and what makes you happy versus this constant kind of compromise. Not just for guys. It happens that women and girls compromise for girls too, because we're taught to do that. We're taught to kind of be like, oh, whatever you want, that kind of people pleasing stuff. Yeah. So anyway, so awesome discussion. I think we should do a part 2. Lauren, you're amazing. I want to hear all your many things that you would give advice to your cousin, sister, friends, whoever that are entering college. So excited that we can keep these conversations going.
Why don't you give us, Lauren, 2 pieces of advice that you feel like were maybe the things that you wish that, or that you told your cousin?
I told her to make sure not to do anything unless she wanted to do it. I was like, don't do something because you feel like you should or you have to. Do it because you want to for you, because it's going to make you feel good. And I also told her, I said, I know it's going to be hard and easier said than done, but really try not to care what other people think, because none of this is going to matter when you graduate. No one's going to be thinking about what you wore to that one party Friday night. Even if someone makes a comment about it that night, no one's going to be thinking about it a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now.
Bam.
They
Those
are great
good.
pieces of advice. Even in life, don't give a shit what other people think, because in the end of the day, you have to only make yourself happy.
Yeah, and I wish I had known that in college and didn't start putting it into practice until after I graduated. You shouldn't have to wait till after you graduate college to start living the way that you want to.
Listen, you're ahead of the game. There's some people who don't figure that out until they're in their 30s. Some
That
people,
makes me feel
40s,
better.
50s,
40s,
60s.
50s, yeah. Self-exploration is a great thing. You can start it in college, you can start it in high school, you can start it right after you graduate. But like self-exploration, learning to love yourself, to honor what you want to do is really, really important. And that's what will make you feel, even if you feel lonely at first, eventually your tribe will come to you. Build it, they will come, right?
That was another thing that I told her. I said the best things that are going to happen to you are going to come out of your discomfort. So don't be afraid to be uncomfortable.
Ooh,
You're right.
I love that.
You're right.
That's great advice too, because these situations are uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
you. Okay, you are so helpful. I'm really excited that you're not flying under the radar with us, that you are out there exploring and helping us to help others. That's amazing.
Thank you,
My
Lauren.
girl, fly.
Thank you.
All right, take care. So welcome to the wrap up on our interview with Lauren. And I guess, Dr. Chez, there were a couple things that kind of stood out for me, and they were what I wanted to sort of dig into with the wrap up. And I think the first thing for me was how Lauren explained how she didn't really explore the things in her major or that she was interested in, that she got so absorbed in Greek life. And Greek life is a thing that keeps coming up for you and I in these interviews. And I think it's really interesting because there is such a high premium put on Greek life. And I think it's important to explore for those that do opt out of Greek life or who don't get into Greek life. What are the upsides of it? I think that it's great to have this group. I remember, both of my kids went to huge schools, and I thought, oh, this is great. It'll give them an immediate family or like connected group, which is true. That is a really beautiful part of it. But I think that the beautiful aspects of the other path, maybe less taken or maybe equally taken, is that you do have an opportunity to get to know yourself a little bit better because you're more individualistic when you're not in a sorority or a fraternity, and you get to explore in that way your personal interest. It takes more, it requires more of you. As Lauren said over and over again, she had all of these obligations. You will have to find and explore your own interests. Hopefully you can hook on to a friend. I do say this, like my husband, this is a really funny story. I'll give this really quick. My husband was not a part of a Greek life at all. He met his best friend in college, he is his best friend still today. They met in a women's defense course class. They both mistakenly thought it was self-defense, and it was a women's self-defense course. So they both knew that they were like literally missing some sort of brain cells, and they became like instant friends, and they've been friends ever since, which is great. But like the funny thing is that he met him doing this thing that had nothing to do with Greek life or anything. It was just like, all right, I guess I'll take a women's. Actually, I think maybe they knew and they thought they were going to find women. Maybe they whatever. But anyway, so the more you explore, you're going to find your friends in different groups, whether you volunteer, Habitat for Humanity, whatever you do. So I thought that was interesting.
Okay, I love that your husband did that. That is absolutely hysterical. Here's the thing with my take on Greek life. A lot of people, I don't remember the exact percentage, but several don't participate either actively or because it doesn't work out for them, which is so sad to me because it feels like such a big rejection. But you still want to find your people. And so no matter whether you do Greek life or you don't do Greek life, and I'm actually, the way Greek life stands today, I am not in favor of it. It needs an overhaul. Like, please, dear God, overhaul this thing and use this captive audience for good versus for hurting people just to get in the club, like the hazing thing and all of that. It's when are we going to wake up to be, when are 20 somethings going to wake up enough to be like, okay, let's do this differently. But anyway, but either way, yes, college is a time to find your people with your interests. So I love that Lauren helped us kind of say out loud as one of her top 10 things, go join clubs. She didn't do that, but go join your interests, not just a fraternity or sorority, not just, your roommates who you live with. Find people with interests that are similar to yours.
Yeah, I think that is great advice. Obviously, she wishes she did that. Second thing that she brought up that is just really bothering me these days is this lack of connected interactions. I don't know what we want to call them, experiences with another person. They are not in any way true connection, but they are these experiences with individuals that don't seem to care for one another. And it's like, she said, 4-year break from real life. Nothing really matters. No real world expectations of you, which is fine. I know that that can be in a bunch of different ways, just going out and drinking, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whatever. But then she also talked about the paradox of choice, that you get there and you have this paradox of choice. There's so many choices. You think you'll find someone, but there's so many people that you're like, oh, I could be with that person. I could be with that person. And then the hookup culture on top of it. And I just worry, how do you get to 22, 23 years old without these experiences of initial, like fundamental, rudimentary, like, I don't know, initial intimate relationships? And I had relationships in high school that were not sexual, like, I mean, penetrative sex, but they were very real. Like, we had very real emotions. We had very real relationships. We really loved each other, like, whether you call that puppy love or whatever. But the fact that kids aren't having those really concerns me.
Absolutely. And what concerned me about that too, Steph, is that there's the expectations are so ingrained and so subtle, but spoken in the undercurrent, that I have to be this and not this, but this and this, and I can't be a prude, but I can't have too many people in my life. I can't do this, but then I have to do, it is so much to navigate that I don't know how somebody can be authentic, because there are these rules or expectations that just keep you from being truly vulnerable and authentic with anyone, and kind of playing this game. And I think it's a social media dictated game, or a culture game, that I have to be something. And so I love that one of her top 2 tips were, do what you want, don't care what other people think. That's amazing to have that at her age. And I want college freshmen to hear that. Do what you want, don't care what people think. Expectations are the downfall, man. When we have expectations that are put on us, those are the shoulds. Whenever you hear yourself say should, I should, he should, we should. Should is shit. Like, should is a no. So when you hear yourself saying, I should do this, that's an expectation. That's probably culture dictated, somewhere else dictated. Really assess for yourself, what do you want and what do you really think? And your own kind of connection with yourself is the way to then get connected with others. I don't think we have enough of that. I don't think that people are assessing enough within. We're just trying to fit in. And I'm not saying this is just in college. I think this is beyond college too. It's a level of growing that we all need to do. So anyway, love that she's helping get us there by kind of pointing those things out.
I couldn't agree more. I'm so grateful for her insight. I hope that she will come back and talk to us.
If we are in this epidemic of loneliness, I think it's going to take a conscious effort to really challenge the system and challenge ourselves to be willing to be authentic and vulnerable to reach true intimacy. And I'm saying that in an emotional intimacy way. But as you've said many times, Steph, this sexual thing is starting first, and then we're trying to develop emotional intimacy. And then there ain't no time for that. People are like, no, I already got what I wanted, so I'm not going to get into the emotional intimacy. But I think that's important. I like that you said, Steph, that in high school, you loved who you were dating. And I think there's got to be this opportunity for love. And is that what's missing? Like the true connection of I love you, with friends and dates or whatever. But anyway, so I think we have a long way to go, but I'm hopeful based on what Lauren is helping us with. And I can't wait for her to come back and give us more and more and more.
I couldn't agree more, Dr. Chez. So thank you so much for listening. Please join us next Sunday at 7 a.m.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Chez Leeby and Stephanie Boye based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guests that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7 on Sundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.